Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the PTC podcast. I'm here today with old friend Steve Cronin. Steve is one of our original friends and business associates from a long time ago.
Go back a long way.
Yeah, very long way. Steve was with us in the hours and weeks, months before we set up the PTC, helping us along with some advice between the two bookends of our previous world, me and Chris. Interestingly, I was saying earlier, I went to type in your name into my iPhone calendar, and it suggested a cafe in Marina Mall that we had actually met way back in 2015.
Yes, that's 9 years ago, right?
Yeah, and it could also be, I didn't know the exact date, but it could also be this month. It could be around now because this was the window when we set up the company. So
yeah, amazing. Because I used to run a sports science physiological testing business.
Yeah.
And I left my previous job, which was in like advising banks and sovereign wealth funds, to do that. And then eventually, like, my personal finance business just kind of took over, and I've kind of like left the sports science before. So I've got these two hats, which is like sports science and money.
Yeah.
And they vie for my time.
Well, that's it, because we were talking in the sport, what we do with sports science, and that was where we started. I've also done some sweat tests with you.
That's right.
On the other podcast for life education.
Hydration and money are my two passions.
Yeah, salt intake and saving money.
Yeah.
But that's it. This is what I was kind of hoping to have a chat with you about, is the financial advice, because it's, as everybody complains, you know, this day and age in schools, we should be learning about the tax system and money and blah, 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 which we're taught history and geography and oxbow lakes and stuff and sedimentary rocks, that kind of stuff, which is not so useful when you're 65 and you've realised you've not been saving any money, especially in a city like Dubai where there's no pension.
Yeah, I mean, I really think schools should teach the three important things, which is like how to deal with money and how to stay healthy and how to talk to the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And or the same sex, depending on how to talk to people you're attracted to, let's say.
Yeah.
And
which is how to talk to
those
people.
Three, yeah, and how to talk to people, yeah, exactly, and how to have some kind of like emotional empathy. Those things are the useful things. Oxbow lakes, much less useful.
No, yeah, what a Bunsen burner is. I'll never need to know that, but I know exactly what it is.
Unless you need to burn a school down or something.
Oh yeah, which could happen if you don't manage your money right. You go back like Ted Kaczynski,
exactly,
sitting in his little tree in the forest. But anyway, let's not digress. We were talking before because we did a podcast a long time ago. We spoke a little bit about like saving, like the main things you need to consider when saving. But that was kind of segueing just talking about salaries and people working for yourself. Dubai is a very entrepreneurial place. I think maybe post 2008, a lot of my friends are much more entrepreneurs than they are working for corporate big IBM companies where everything's looked after. So when you're working for yourself, which is kind of what I'm getting at, is money in is great one month, it's average the next month, it's terrible the next month. It's average the next month, it's great the next. Like that's how and even looking at our business now, it tends to go that way. Great month, average month, terrible month, average month, great month. And it just cycles up and down, up and down, up and down. So having a bit of discipline in your health and wellness doesn't always translate into your discipline in your savings.
Yeah.
So you invest so much in your health, your wellness, and then, like I said, you get to the end of the month and all your money's gone. So what can you remember even what we spoke about the last time? What were the topics that we covered?
I think what we were talking about, and this was like quite a few years ago. We
before the lockdown.
We were talking about people in the fitness industry, and this isn't just people in the fitness industry, right? But because they work for themselves or because they work quite a lot on commission, their income is really unpredictable, and it's not always that high, in fairness, right? You know, compared to like the lawyers or whatever. And so the struggle can be against facing like ongoing expenses and just the general cost of living, never quite knowing how much money is going to be coming in, and like how do you survive on that? And we were talking about how like a lot of people in the fitness industry just bump along and they survive, but they don't have anything to save. And as expats, none of us have pensions, right? So the danger is you save nothing until you're 60, and then you go back home and the government isn't going to look after you, and so you've got nothing. And so you have to find a way to save. I was even saying this to my friend today, who has a standard salary. It's not about your salary, it's about your salary minus what you spend.
Mm-hmm.
So we all know plenty of people who earn 80,000 dirhams a month, and then they spend 79,000 dirhams a month, or sometimes 82,000 dirhams a month.
Yeah.
Right? They're actually worse off than people who earn 5,000 dirhams a month but only spend 2,000 dirhams a month, by a factor of 3, right? So it's really about how much you can save every month. And I know that, like, for people in the fitness industry or any industry where you're based, real estate, for example, is another classic example, where it's driven by commission, you never quite know what's going to be coming in. It's tough. And I think you just have to find some element of predictability in it. I think, like, if you know that the summer months are going to be rough,
Mm-hmm.
you have to stockpile cash for it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you know that you're going to have a rent check coming out in 6 months' time, that's a great excuse not to invest, right? Because you're like, well, I've got to save my rent check. Put a little bit of money aside every single month as a sinking fund to get towards that. People know this stuff. It's kind of, it's you can Google it. You Google how to budget. It's all on there, right? But people just don't do it. And I think that's the difficult thing. The other thing is, I think it's good to try and get multiple income streams if you can, right? So, if you're in the fitness world, then you're doing your private sessions, but you're also doing what you do, which is the group sessions, or you're also running online courses, or like whatever it takes. And then what I find is, like, when the private coaching isn't doing so well, then something else is doing better. And then by having those 3 different income streams, like, it levels out. So like personally for me, I have, it's all the same content, but I do corporate financial well-being workshops for company employees. I do private coaching for individuals, and then I run online courses. And sometimes those things are up and sometimes those things are down, but they move out of sync with each other. And so, like, I'm always okay. Yeah. And I think that's where you have to get to, where you're not just relying on one thing that is unpredictable, because then, life is tough.
Yeah, oh man, I could do a whole podcast.
That was a big rant.
No, I love it. I love it. I didn't want to interrupt you at all. There's so many things there I could have jumped in on. Like, talking about the last point about it's tough. Like, we've had 9 years now of this, and for the first 2 years, maybe more, it was literally like, okay, a PT, Steve's coming in tonight, 7 p.m. He's 300 dirhams. Okay, if he gives me that cash, that means I can get the petrol. On the way home, I can stop into my garage. I can get food. Okay, cool. All right, great. Steve would show up, 7 p.m. Oh, mate, I forgot the cash. I'd be like, oh, it's fine. It's fine, Steve. No worry. Not a problem. We're fine. And then you're like, damn it, right, credit card. Wow. I need petrol. Ka-ching, credit card on the way home. I'll get my shopping tomorrow. Right, the next day, who's in? Somebody who come in the end of the week, give a bit of cash, and then you're fine. But it's literally like cash in one hand, out the other hand. There's no... we had the company bank, but sometimes it didn't even make it to the company bank. It was just like panic. Yeah,
and you're missing one thing, which is a lot of people. Let's take Filipinos for example. They have an extended family back home, right? So it's not just you paying the petrol. It's like you have to support your extended family, and we're talking like uncles and nephews and stuff like that back home. That's another stress, and that's difficult as well. So I think there's a lot of people in this part of the world who are living kind of hand to mouth, and it's not easy. But the problem is that the people back home think that you've got this amazing job, you've got lots of money. It's like, well, the life is also expensive here as well.
Yeah,
right?
man.
So
I used to be embarrassed because I used to drive full embarrassing disclosure. I used to drive a Hummer here, and I got an absolutely fantastic deal on it when I bought it. Like, it was a dream. A friend of mine sold it to me. I couldn't have asked for a better deal. Which is why I ended up driving a Hummer while I'm rolling this credit card debt. The repayments on the loan were real cheap. It was that was affordable. That wasn't a stress. But just on the point of when my friends would come over and I'd pick them up and they'd go, "Oh, you driving a Hummer?" I'd be like, "I got a great deal." Trust me. If you knew my credit card bill that I can't shift, if you knew like the anxiety I have over not getting paid, like, there was just a completely different life. But yeah, you definitely on the outside you look like one thing.
But at least you didn't buy the Hummer to impress people, right? Or maybe you did, but like at least you got a good deal on it, right?
I got a great deal from a great friend who gave me the keys like 3 weeks before I even gave him the money.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So there you go. You got a great deal. And I think lots of people, not only are they living hand to mouth, but they're also trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to show off. And that's also really dangerous, right? Because like at some point you just have to be humble and be like, actually, no one really cares if I'm wearing some like pretty tatty trousers.
Yeah.
No one really cares if I'm driving a Yaris that much, right? They don't care that much. As soon as you open your mouth, that's much more important than whatever car you're driving. And interestingly, and Andrew Hallam was talking about this the other day, is that if you drive a fancy car, people actually hate you, right?
Yeah.
They like the car, but they don't like you. So don't do it to impress people. Right?
Do you know what I get? Now I'm getting a bit older. I'm starting to get this envy of people who have sensible cars. Someone who rolls up in a sensible car, I'm like, oh, you're sensible. I wish I was
time to sell your Lambo, Keith.
I wish I was sell my Lambo. Yeah, I wouldn't get anything for it if I had a Lambo. But people who drive sensible cars, I'm getting envious of now because I'm like, you're smart. You're smarter than me.
Well, there's an element of just like not caring, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't care what other people think about you, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You know, and I go back to, Bill Gates. I remember. And okay, Bill Gates kind of goes up and down in popularity, and is he trying to destroy the world or whatever? But like, essentially, like he's a very, very successful, famous person. And when he started realizing that millions of children were dying of diarrhea, right? It's not a topic that any of us like to hear about or listen or even say, that word. And he was like, this is so preventable, right? Like millions of kids dying of this in Africa. Let's fix this, right? Like we can workshop it. And he messaged like 20 of the top universities in the US. And he was like, hey, it's Bill Gates here. Like, will you partner with me to do this? And like 3 replied to him. And I was like, wow. Like think of the rejection, right? He must have felt. And that's Bill Gates, like one of the most successful, richest people in the world. And so I use that as an example to remind myself when I get rejected and people ignore me, that like I should just be pleased that I put myself out there rather than hiding away in a cupboard.
Well, this is it. This is part of why I've got you here, because I know the expertise you have in this niche that everybody needs to know. And we've talked a lot about it just because we're friends, but I don't know how I would have ever got in contact with you had we not been already associated through all the other parts of Dubai that we knew each other.
Yeah, it sucks to be like the world's best kept secret, right?
Yeah.
So that comes to marketing, right?
Yeah, but also, yeah, maybe. But I mean, look, when you're working for yourself, you got to just buy what's in front. You got to just keep moving forward. If marketing budget laying there is not what's the most important thing. You've got to get your revenue stream 1, 2, and 3 firing, plus your kids to school. It's very different.
Yeah. I get a lot of business through word of mouth, which is nice actually, because then it's warm leads, and I don't do a lot of advertising. I don't put up billboards on Shakespeare Road or anything like that. And for now, like while I've got small kids, that's probably the way it's gonna be. But people need to know about this stuff. And I think just money in general, no one talks about it, right? People don't really talk about, hey, I've got this great ETF or this is how to invest. People don't really talk about when they're having money struggles. And so everyone's like suffering. So I think so many people in the UAE are like suffering quietly and really suffering. And they don't know who to turn to. You turn to your bank, they're going to rip you off, right? The stories of the bank wealth managers is appalling. The story of so many financial advisors, unfortunately, is appalling here, like trapping you in long-term savings plans. We've all got experience of that. And so like just for someone to say, hey, you know what, like I got into this financial independence thing and there was this cool Facebook group and now I just invest my money in a global stock fund and it takes me 5 minutes a month. And some people will be receptive. For those people who are receptive to it, not everybody will be, like it will change their life financially, right? And so the companies that have massive marketing budgets are the insurers and the banks and the financial advisors. So they're going to be viral much more easily and get in and cold call people, etc. And so we almost have to fight against that by just like boring people at dinner parties or in the gym or wherever it might be. And just to say like, like it is, there are easier ways to invest. And it's almost like you're part of this secret cult. Yeah. And then you have to see whether like people are open to joining. But also I think it's you have to spot people who are struggling and find if you can help them, right? Because like, you know, maybe a client comes to you and says like, I just can't pay this week.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't take much to say like, you know, off the record, like, are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
are you financially? And that can really help, because like we've been there, right?
Yeah.
Like I, you know, I think it is important to share these stories, you know, like as entrepreneurs. When I was running my sports science business, there were big companies that I won't name that would pay you 6 months, maybe 12 months later. And that's hard on your cash flow. And
Yeah.
I remember having 90 dirhams in the bank. And having 90 dirhams in the bank is not useful, because you can only take out 100 dirhams at a time. So I couldn't get a taxi. And I remember that as a particular low point in my life. And I've never had that since. But like, so we've all been there,
Yeah,
right? And we've all made stupid, you know, I try to remind people, you know, I'm not some like perfect money guru. I still have bad habits. You know, I don't particularly like budgeting. It doesn't come naturally to me, even if I know how to do it. And yeah, you know, I've wasted my money on stupid stuff. So, you know, people are not alone, and they need to know that.
Yeah.
Right? And they also need to know how to dig themselves out of the hole, because the holes can get deep pretty quickly, especially with credit card debt.
Oh, crazy deep. You were the first person to explain to me the realm, the what do you call it, the snowball effect of the interest. And still to this day, I don't know what you did, but you did some calculations where you went, it's this much per month, which means at the end of 12 months, it's actually this much.
Yeah,
and it was like 25 or 40% or something.
Yeah.
And I was like,
it's like 40% a year.
I was like, what the
It's
fuck
crazy.
did you just do? Because that's what's killing me. I had two years, if not 3 years, of couldn't clear credit card debt. And that's a whole other boring story. But when I finally cleared it, I was like, oh my Lord, thank God for that. And then I remember touching on what you mentioned about people need to talk about it. I think we spoke about this last time, or when I met with Andrew Hallam, we did a video on the other podcast then. And it must have come up in conversation where I'd mentioned like just having enough in your savings account. So if your car breaks down, you know you don't have to pull your credit card out and clean this up next month. Was a massive weight off my shoulders. And somebody commented like, I really appreciate that. Like I felt the same. And I don't know who this person was. It's YouTube. But I was like, wow, yeah, people don't like appreciate or talk about it. So like it's possible for people. But
yeah, cash buffers are so important, because like otherwise you're one mishap away from financial disaster, right? And it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
It's brutal. And yes, you live in Dubai, and yes, your apartment has a nice view, and yes, you can pay your bills. Because I'm always like, cover the rent. I was never that bad where I'm behind on stuff. It's just this one credit card bill. And that was because probably for a little while when I had a real bad month, I went out a bit too much, bought a few extra drinks. I shouldn't have gone out that night at all. And then like there was a little issue with my car, I used it then I bought a holiday I shouldn't have bought. And that's probably enough. But then you're dragging that stone uphill for the next 6-12 months if you can't just clear it and pay it.
I'm a bit tough love on people who have credit card debt that they can't pay off, and usually there is a sad story behind it. But like people have said, it's like your hair is on fire, right? When your hair is on fire, you can't go to work, right? You have to put your hair out. You can't do anything. You have to put your hair out, right? And credit card debt is like hair on fire debt. Like your whole life needs to revolve around paying off that debt. And that sounds extreme and tedious, right? But like you need to re-engineer your whole life to pay off that. Whether you get a consolidation loan, that's the easy way to do it, or you just grind and hustle and pay that off. That's what you have to do. And then when you get through the other side, then you can live, right?
Yeah, the consolidation loan is the easy way out, but it doesn't fix any of the habits.
No, and then you come back again, right?
Then you just have to build it up again,
right?
You got to pay that off, plus whatever your credit card builds up. The tediousness is what you said. I spent the best part of a year at home on the couch in a shared villa with 2 other people watching Netflix on my laptop. Do you know what I mean? Because I had to clear this bill. I was like, I had options of either, I had gone through whatever life turmoil. I had an option of either going out with the boys every weekend and drowning my sorrows, or fixing the number one problem that I could fix, and it was my financial situation.
Yeah.
So that's tedious. That stayed in. That was the best part of a year.
Yeah, wow.
All of 2017, I think it's either 2017 or 2018. The only thing that I can remember in my life that year is I got a dog. It's the only thing of impact in my life that changed that 12-month period, just to clear that credit card bill. And yeah, I did it. Great, whatever. But you learn the hard way. But talking about the savings, right? So what we're talking about, or what you talk about a lot, it's not about putting 5,000 dirhams in your savings account, in your bank account, or putting, you know, money in a shoebox under the bed. You're talking about saving in the stock exchange.
Yeah.
So that the money, as the stocks grow and as they increase in their value, your money increases in its value. So when you're an old person, you saved whatever, $200,000, euros, pounds, your whole life. Instead of that being in the shoebox as $200,000, losing money to the inflation,
Yes.
and losing money to whatever else prices are going up in your micro world, it's gone up in value more than inflation, and some to give you extra money.
Yep.
But also, you do it in this mechanism, which I'm going to get you to explain in more better detail than me, as opposed to going with a pension fund, because a pension fund will take a chunk of that percentage as their own fees. So you lose a massive amount of your savings with the pension fund through inflation, through their fees. You end up with very little surplus at the end of your 40 years.
Yeah, so it slightly depends which...
Am I right?
Absolutely. You're
okay,
right,
that's my
right.
layman brain of, that's how I would explain it to Destiny, who's only 22 behind the camera.
Yeah.
And I'm like...
22 is a good time to start, by the way.
Start saving, but not in the money box,
wow,
in the stock exchange.
Then we wish we started at 22.
Forget it. I'll be retired now. This would be podcast just sitting back on a beach.
You'd have gold microphones.
I'd have flown you to the Bahamas.
Yeah. So when you live in a high tax country like Ireland, UK, then pensions are useful because they are tax shelters. And the government actually rewards you for putting money into that. So you put your money in, they give you a little bonus for tax relief, and then you don't have to pay any tax on the gains or income within that pension until you take it out. So it's really useful. As expats living in a low to no cost country, pensions are not useful particularly, and we can't even access them very easily anyway because we're expats. So what we need to do is build a pension-like asset portfolio so that when you're old, those assets will generate income for you to cover your living expenses, because something's got to cover your living expenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you've got a nice house and you paid off your mortgage. If that's all you've got, like, you can't eat your house, right? So you've got to have some kind of income. And so your job as an expat, some years will be good, some years will be bad, but your job as an expat is to save money and invest it to grow that. Now, whether it's in buy-to-let real estate, and you're going to Airbnb the hell out of things, or whether you're going to put it in sensible stock funds, like those two pillars, you've got to grow those portfolios so that you're growing your asset base for your future when you're retired. And if you do it well, then you can be financially independent much earlier than you think about. And that doesn't mean that you're going to stop work, right? It just means you have the option to stop work. And you build that up in layers. So like, firstly, you have the option to stop work and go and live in a cheap part of Bali, right?
Yeah.
And survive that way. And then you keep going and you build it up and up and up until like you can have any kind of financial independence. So you have to have that sense of direction, and then you're much more motivated to save money, because people just think about the here and now and the survival and the struggle. But like, if you're struggling now, well, you're going to be struggling much more in the future. And that needs to be a kick up the ass for people to like sort their lives out, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's tough, right? We know it's tough, right? Cost of living's high at the moment, but you have to get on it.
Yeah, it's something that one of my friend's dads told me about when I first moved to Dubai. He one evening, we're sitting around a barbecue, and he said, he'd been in Dubai since 1997, and this was maybe 2014 or 15. Have you got a pension fund or something? I was like, no.
What a fun barbecue that was.
Yeah, no, he I won't say he cornered me, but he did manage to just have a word with me only. And then he told me all this, and I was like, what are you talking about? You know, I don't know anything that you're talking about right now. This is all just jargon rolling through my head. And I know now what he was talking about. He was trying to help me out, but mate, you've no pension. Sort your stuff out. If you stay in Dubai a long time. I was only here for 2 years at that stage.
It's amazing. Like, how did he identify you as someone who needed that chat? Or wanted that chat?
I don't know if it was like he singled me out as opposed to the person beside me, but we think just started having a chat, and it just went down that road. I don't think he was like, you. You look like you're careless with your money. Sit down.
Yeah.
I think it was just like, no, we had that, and he was like, here's what you need to do.
Did you listen to him? Did you like do it?
He put it on my radar for the first time in my life. Do you know what I mean? He like put it right there, and I was like, what? And knowing that he'd been in Dubai since '97, I was like, he's not just. There's no reason for him to have this conversation unless it's coming from he really is looking out for me. Because we were in a small little villa. It's not like we were in Emirates Hills and he's trying to tell me this is the recipe for getting rich. You know, he's like, this is what you need to do if you're going to stay here for a long time. And then, and then I can't remember what happened a few years later, but we met you and Andrew Hallam, and it just opened the doors for this. Right now is the time to do it.
Yeah. So Andrew Hallam's got a similar story where he was working at a bus depot, age 18, and there was this like guy who's just really good with money, and his colleague said, like, if Ross ever talks to you about money, like, you listen, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're lucky enough that he trusts you to talk to him, like, you listen. And I think if you find people like that, yeah, you have to listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, look, he didn't tell me the ins and outs, or if he did, I can't remember. But now I sat in on an Andrew Hallam presentation in your back garden where you told everybody to bring treats, and the place was like a 4-year-old's Halloween party.
Yeah, that was nice.
With sweets and treats and Pringles and stuff. But that was you had a big presentation on the wall, and the things I still remember are, if you just put your money in and you just keep putting it in, you should average out with 9% after. Once you don't take it out during a crash, you should finish with a nice average of 9% on your increase on your savings. And the second thing was that women are better than men at saving because they're less emotionally attached to the competitiveness of trying to beat the system. They just get told the plan, they stick to it. So that's my plan, that's my strategy, just to keep going, putting the same amount in and crack on and leave it alone. But do you want to explain a little bit what an ETF is? Because let's take Destiny, who's behind the camera. This is maybe her second time hearing about this. Because Chris is hardcore on this as well. So maybe your third time. But if you were to speak to a 22-year-old and explain what is an ETF, why is it important, how would you go about that?
Yeah, so I think this is why I guess I run my whole business, is because I want people to realize that investing is simple, right? And the whole financial services industry wants you to think that it's complicated, and therefore you need to give your money to them and then they can gouge you with fees. But you don't need to. So the idea is, like, if you look at the stock market over 100 years, right? Let's say 1928, you put in $100, right? Let's say you bought some bread, $100 worth of bread. The same amount of bread that would cost you like about $1,600, so $1,600 today. Okay, 94 years later. Okay, so that's inflation. That's what we need to beat. If you put that in like government bonds or gold, that $100 would have turned into $8,600 on average, right? If you put that money, that $100 into US stocks, today it would be worth $762,000.
That $100.
Yeah. So instead of government bonds and gold making you $8,500, with stocks, it would make $762,000, right? That is huge. And this is why we invest in the stock market, because it makes you money over the long term.
So that's basically, you buy $100 worth of stock.
Yeah.
And then over the next 100 years, more people start buying that stock, and the stock goes up in price.
Yeah.
More people keep buying it, and it keeps going up. You've only spent 100 on it, and now it's worth way more.
Yeah. So let's say your great grandfather had some stock certificates or whatever. Now, obviously, stocks come and go. So we're talking about like a diversified index of multiple stocks, right? But like the principle.
So what does that mean?
Oh, so like as in, obviously if you put your money in a stock in 1928 and then the company goes bankrupt in 1950, then you get nothing, right? So what we're actually talking about is, you might have heard of the S&P 500, which is like the top 500 publicly listed companies in the US. You put your money in them and then you just keep it there for 40 years. Hopefully you add more money. You're just going to have a great return, like 7 to 9% compounding each year grows your money extremely hard.
So when you say you buy the S&P, in the S&P, that's made up of a group of companies.
Yeah.
Am I right? And then you basically get a smidgen of each in that bracket. So as they go up at different rates, the overall package goes up.
Yeah.
Is that kind of right?
Yeah. So we're getting into index investing here, right? Otherwise known as like passive investing, i.e., you just put your money in the index and let it go up. So a
and
company.
Is that the same as your EFT?
We'll get onto
Okay.
that. Yeah. So a company like S&P says, how do we want to let's take the pulse of the US stock market, right? How's it doing? And they say, okay, well, we will track the top 500 companies in the US, or the FTSE 100, the top 100 companies in the UK, right? Well, that sort of stuff. And so we're going to choose which of those 500 companies to put in, and then we're going to track the value of all of their shares. And if you add up all the shares in the S&P 500, it comes to like $40 trillion-ish, right? It's probably a bit more now. That's not an easy number for us to understand, right? So, if I said, in January the 1st, it was $40 trillion. Now it's $41.37 trillion at the end of the year. You're like, okay, how much has it gone up by? Whereas if I say, okay, 40 trillion, let's call that 100, right? We'll just index that down to 100. And at the end of the year, it's gone up 100 to 110. Where you're like, oh, that's 10%. Okay, fine. So these are numbers we can understand.
Yeah.
So the S&P 500 now it's at like 5,700. A year and a bit ago it was at 5,000. These are numbers that we can understand, right? So what you were doing is we're tracking the growth of those 500 companies. Some of those companies do really well. Some of those companies do less well, right? But the point is you're not relying on any one company to do particularly well, right?
See what that is? Do you want to see? We'll carry on,
you are, so let's say, if Zuckerberg's having a bad day, it doesn't matter because there's 499 other companies, so it doesn't matter, right? So that diversification protects you against the risk of individual companies, because individual companies are risky, right? So you're diversifying. And then you're trying to stay in the market for a long time. That really helps as well. And literally, we're thinking like, okay, so if you're 22, right, and you're going to live to 102, hopefully, you've got an 80-year time horizon. That's a long time, yeah? So as long as you don't suddenly need the money to take out, then you can weather any storm that the stock market throws at you, because it does go up and down, right? You just have to get used to that. But you've got your cash buffer. You've got your 6 months total expenses, cash buffer. You're saving up for a property. You've got a little bit of money set aside for that. Maybe you've got some bonds as well. So if the stock market goes down and you suddenly need some money, you can take the bonds out or whatever. So you've got a long time horizon for your stock investments, and that's really important. You're diversified. You're keeping the fees low, right? And this is where, okay, so you want to buy the whole world really easily. How do you do that? This is where exchange-traded funds come in, and this is like the secret source of expat investing, right? And no one teaches this in schools, but they should. Dubai College or whatever, they should be teaching this stuff. Is that massive fund managers like Vanguard, iShares by BlackRock. If you phone up Vanguard and you're like, hey, I want to invest, I've heard about Vanguard, they'll just say no, because you live in the Middle East, they're not interested, right? So you hit this massive brick wall. It took me years to get over this brick wall. And what you need to do is to open up an account with a brokerage, international brokerage. That gives you access to stock exchanges, and then you can buy these funds called exchange-traded funds, i.e. sold on a stock exchange. You can buy them. So just like you can go on the stock exchange and you can buy one share in Apple, you can go onto the stock exchange and you can buy one share in the exchange-traded fund for, let's say, the S&P 500 or the FTSE All World, which is like 3,600 stocks covering the whole world. And then the price of that, once you bought it, goes up and down based on the average of all of those stocks that you've got in there. So it's an amazing way, just like at the click of a button, which takes 5 minutes, to get exposure to the whole world. And that's all you need to do.
Yeah.
I don't own any individual stocks, and I never think about
You haven't fancied it?
I did back in the day. I bought a couple of mining stocks and a couple of banking stocks, and the mining stocks did well and the banking stocks did badly. So where did I end up? Back where I started with. It was a total waste of time. So I sold all that stuff, and I sold all my actively managed funds, and I just I just have like a global stock fund and a global government bond fund, and that's it. And we were even talking about, for you, if you're investing in euros, you can get a single like stock and bond fund. So then you only need one fund. Think how easy that is, right? It doesn't take a PhD to invest in one fund, once a month. And so like the message I want to get out to people is like, this stuff is easy. Like once someone shows you the door and you take a little bit of time to learn the jargon, like what an ETF is, like what a limit order is, how to use like interactive brokers or Salwa or whichever platform, that takes like 1 or 2 hours. Then you have this skill for the rest of your life. And then if a financial advisor or a banker comes along and says, hey, can I manage your money for like 1.5-2% a year, you're like, well, dude, that's like 30% of my annual profit that I'm going to make in the stock market of 7%. So like, no thanks, I'll just do it myself. And it's very empowering because then you know what to do. And sure, if you're in real estate or in the fitness industry and your income isn't stable, at least put like $1,000 into the stock market in the way I've explained, so that you learn how to do it. And then when life gets better and you paid off your debt, like you're ready to go and you don't have to learn about this stuff because you already know it and you've already got experience of riding up the ups and downs of the stock market.
Definitely the mistake I made was I waited too long. I wanted enough over here and there, and then I'll start, instead of just being like, just pump it in there. And then like you said, had I done that when we first spoke about this way back pre-lockdown, I would have had some savings, doing some stuff at the time where my income went to 0 and I was digging into my current account savings account, but at least it would have been doing something somewhere. But I didn't. I was trying to get to a certain amount in my 6-month buffer, and I was trying to do it all instead of just dump it in and get going. I have a couple of questions that you might actually be able to help me with. I've always wondered, but first I want to just make sure that for the layman who doesn't understand the jargon yet, what you've just described is kind of what I mentioned earlier, is there's a pot of a load of companies out there, and you can just click like a one-click checkout, and you get a smidgen of a stock in each of those companies. And this Vanguard that you've described, they've already decided what companies, and you just buy a little bit. So you throw $1,000 in, and for the sake of this conversation, you get one share in 1,000 companies. And then over the year, 500 go up, 200 don't go anywhere, 100 stay a bit, and whatever the narcissist goes down. So the 500 that's going up, you get a bit more money. You lose a bit on the tail end by those guys who did terrible and whatever. So that's the principle of it. You just one click, you buy. But where the difference is, and this is the real thing that impacted me, was by taking the call from the guy who's in Singapore who's trying to sell you the expat pension. Two things. They're going to take 4% by the end of your lifetime. So you lose
4% a year.
So 4% a year, which is 3% a year you're going to lose to inflation. Give or take. 4% you're going to lose to those fees. Which means of your average 9%, you've lost 7% because you did it with this company. So you got 2%.
And you're lucky if you get 9%, by the way. I would go for 7%.
Okay.
Frankly.
So 7%.
That's even worse.
Which just makes it worse. So a chunk of your savings has gone to fees in this company because you just didn't spend a little bit longer thinking a little bit slower about what you're describing. And that's just going into the grassroots interactive brokers and doing it yourself.
And also, I mean, a lot of these savings plans invested in crazy stuff. Like I had a client who's a expat teacher in Nigeria, and her financial advisor had put her in one of these savings plans. Once you're in one of these savings plans, you're kind of trapped, right? And the advisor can pretty much put in, recommend whatever they want. And if you just are ignoring these things, then you're completely vulnerable to it. She was invested in timber, so like forestry. She was invested in Japanese small businesses. Hardly any American stuff. America's like 62% of the stock market. It was insane, right? And they're just gouging it because, of course, these funds have like 2% ongoing management charge, right? Plus the advisory fees, plus the platform fees. They say it adds up to 4%. So through no fault of her own, she was getting completely screwed, and she was in risky stuff. So then that makes the performance even worse on top of the fees, right? And so what we find is most people in these savings plans, and I know people who've been in these savings plans for 25 years, and so we have evidence here, like they get back what they put in if they're lucky.
Yeah.
Right? With no inflation, no gains to match inflation. Like you put in $200,000, over 25 years, you end up with $200,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
And inflation is just eating that alive.
Yeah.
And so that's a terrible state of affairs. Some people are unlucky. And we should talk about scams actually, because that's the important thing. Is that some people who are unlucky, they put in $200,000 and they've either lost it all or they've lost half of it because it was invested in stupid stuff. And some of it is stuff that only the financial services provider can give them access to. And that sounds exciting, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm playing with the big boys now. Mm-hmm. And then it's some like dodgy fund that completely blows up, but it was paying 8% commission to the financial advisor, and that's why they put you in it. And so you lose everything. Like last night, I was talking to a couple. They're like super smart. Like when I checked them out on LinkedIn, I was like, wow, these people are impressive. Like dealing in with the sheikhs, like really like impressive people. And they've lost hundreds of thousands because like some very slick advisor persuaded them into these like structured notes and these private equity investments, and it sounded great, but they've lost all of it, right? Compared to riding out the ups and downs of the stock market, doing it yourself, so you've only got yourself to blame, using the support networks like me, Simply FI, whatever. There's lots out there. You're going to do so much better.
But it's not even about... You're going to have losses because that's the way the stock market goes, which is kind of one of my questions in a minute. But if you just... And this is where there's a few things you don't have to understand the intricacies of it all. You just have to know that as long as when you get to an old age person and you want to withdraw, you're not withdrawing in the middle of a recession. So at the end of it, you want to be ending out in a nice in a Celtic tiger, which is what you used to call it, around a really good economic boom. And then your money should be a little bit more up than it was when you started. But you just keep putting it in. You are gonna be better off than if you went with a fee-paying, percentage-taking pension company.
Yeah.
Because also the other thing which I didn't know is if you want to extract, This
is for expats, right? Like so, like
for expats.
For your listeners back home, right? Then probably putting it in a pension fund is good, but you have to choose the right pension fund and the right funds inside. You have to choose the right pension platform and the right funds inside that to make sure they're as low fee as possible. Yeah.
And the second thing with these companies is, if you smell a rat and you want to get out of it, it's extremely difficult to get out of it.
Yes.
They have expensive. A lot of a lot of black small print that says you must pay exorbitant amount of money in order to cut this contract short.
Yeah.
Which is brutal. Again, that'll swallow up a chunk.
And it's still sometimes usually better to get out of it and take the hit. And as I said to this couple last night, I was like, this is the university of life, and like you will never make that mistake again. And that mistake has brought them to me. So they came to a talk that I did yesterday. I was telling them exactly what I was saying about you, about how easy it is to invest. And they're super motivated now. Mm-hmm. And they're in their late 50s. So they can't make one more mistake. They cannot make one more mistake. But the knowledge that I can share with them, and that, it's not complicated. We basically explained it on this podcast. They will have for the rest of their life so that they're not blowing up their money when they're 80. And that's super important.
Okay, so I have two really meathead moron questions.
Okay.
What makes the stock exchange go up? Well, if I buy Apple today, I know it's expensive. Let's say it's $100 a share. What makes that go up? Is my question.
Okay, so let's take Apple specifically. What makes Apple go up in share price is the expectation that the company will grow in the future, that their profits will grow, right? So they'll expand into new countries, they come up with new technologies, not just be so reliant on phones, that their phones are becoming even more popular, they come up with this amazing AI phone, like all this sort of stuff. If the expectation of future profits grows, then the share price will go up. That's over the long term, right? From day to day, it's about what's happening in China, what's happening with the US election, like whatever's happening with whatever, right? And does the stock market care about that today? Is the US inflation report coming out? Like all this stuff, right? That's why we're not investing from day to day, because these things kick the stock price around. But over the long term, it's going up. and it's going up because of that expectation of future growth. Now, you get a company like Eastman Kodak or Lehman Brothers or General Electric or now Intel, where suddenly that growth picture is starting to disappear, the share price starts to go down very rapidly.
We'll get to share price, because I have another question about share price going down, equally as meatheadish, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So when you're saying the expectation of the market going up, is there, I don't think there is, but is there a person who says, right, it's $100 today, tomorrow it's 101? Who decides if it goes up 2, if it goes up 0.5? Like, how does it, who sets the expectation? Is it that people are buying and that's kind of what we interpret as the expectation? Or is there somebody deciding the price?
So there's a couple of things going on. I mean, it's mainly driven by supply and demand, right? So if the future of Apple or Nvidia looks really bright, then people will want to get into those shares, and they'll just bid it up, right? If the price is at 100, they're like, well, I'm prepared to pay 105 because I know that in the future there's going to be future growth. It's a growth story there, right? But there's also at the same time there's institutions who are writing broker reports on each company, and they're doing all this clever analysis, probably over-analysis, to say, well, we think Apple's price it's 100 now, it's going to be 120 by the end of the year, right? And then people are like, oh, well, that's a bargain. They all jump in, right? So those can move the market as well.
Okay, so let's take the old-fashioned way of the guy on the phone in the stock in Wall Street. I want to buy Apple. I call this guy. He shouts to somebody. Right.
Yeah, they used to.
Yeah,
not anymore. Yeah. It's all electronic these days.
Yeah. Grant me all that. Yeah. But what I'm trying to figure out is, right, is it like the price keeps going up because everyone's trying to buy and the people who own are not selling until it gets up to 110, and then somebody goes, I'll sell, and then they can buy? Like, where are they buying from? Because there's not just an infinite amount of reach in, here's another Apple stock for you, here's one for you.
Yeah, so I think you broadly got it right. So there are companies in the middle. The whole stock exchange process has quite a number of players. That's quite complicated. But essentially, you get what are called market makers who sit in the middle, and they guarantee that they will always give a price for that stock or for that ETF, right? So they'll always give a buying price and a selling price. Because they know they can turn it around somewhere else and get rid of it if they have to.
So there is literally a person deciding the price.
Well, there's not only one market maker.
Yeah.
And remember that they have to turn it. They may not want to accumulate this stock, so they have to turn around and get rid of it as well. So they're gonna price it according to the market. It's not like a monopoly where they're figuring out how to gouge people, right? So there are quite a lot of competing mechanisms to make sure that the price is as accurate as it can be, and that's why it's very hard to beat the market. Right? Because within this whole process, there are winners and losers of people trying to guess what's Apple going to do. Some people get it right, some people get it wrong. And what we're saying is ignore all that and just buy the market, because over the years, some ups and downs, but the market goes up. Why does it go up? It's because partly because of inflation, just prices just go up, but partly because of innovation, new technologies, new ideas, greater access to the world, whatever it might be. In general, companies are able to make more profit and grow, and that's why the share prices of the whole market have gone up over the years, a lot over time. So, and there's no reason for that to stop, right? There's just no reason for that to stop. And so, rather than worrying about what Apple's doing, rather than worrying about what China's doing, or the UAE, or the UK, or the US, you just buy the whole world, right? Because we saw, COVID's a great example of this, right? Global pandemic, everyone's shutting down, right? And yet, some companies do really, really well. So Amazon did really well, Peloton did really well, Facebook did really well, Zoom did really well,
done very well.
Johnson & Johnson doing detergents.
Pfizer. You guys did all right, didn't you?
Pfizer did really well. So there's plenty of companies that are doing really well. If China and the US have a war, Not a great situation, right? But hey, there's been wars in the past. You look at the stock market in the Second World War, it's pretty interesting, right? But like after 1942, as soon as the Americans won the Battle of Midway in the Pacific and started beating the Chinese, started beating the Japanese, then the share price like goes up and up and up and doesn't stop until like, you know, the late 50s and 60s, right? So there have been plenty of crazy times in the past. You know, the threat of global communism, like oil shocks, things like this. People not able to fill up their cars for 3 days, all sorts of crazy stuff. And we've always got through it. And there's no reason why it won't happen again. Even if there's like temporary losses, as you referred to, right? Those losses are temporary. So as long as you don't panic and sell, then those losses will disappear over time and they'll grow and you'll be fine.
So, in my head, what you've just said, tell me how right or wrong I am, is that when I want to buy, I need someone who's willing to sell. So if they've bought at a certain price, they're not going to sell until they sell at a higher price. So therefore, they've bought at 100, they're going to sell at 105. That makes the price 105. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's useful to know a bit about how the market works, but actually you don't really need to know about this. All you need to know is that like you want to buy, let's say, the Vanguard FTSE All World ETF. I mean,
don't base your decision making on this this part of the conversation.
You just put the money in every month, regardless of what the price is. Over the years, it will go up, and that's the key thing.
So remember that, and if you want to tune out now, stop listening. So I'm going to ask an even stupider question, because this is just for my own curiosity.
Sure.
This is not like that. Because this is really what made me think. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a long time ago, and we both just went, I don't know. When a share price is dropping, what makes it stop? As soon as it starts to drop, people start selling. Nobody wants to buy at this price if a share price is on its way down. So they're only going to buy at a lower price, and they're obviously expecting it to turn around. So they're getting a good deal. Apple goes, someone says something wrong, Apple drops a bit. A load of people buy, it bounces back up.
Yeah.
I might have just answered my own question.
I mean, that's it. That's literally it. Is that at some point, someone's like, okay, Apple may not be flavor of the day, but it's still Apple, right? People still love their iPhones. They still love the Mac. So, you know, if the share price goes down to a certain level, they're like, well, that's a bargain. And also you can translate you can look at the price versus the earnings, i.e., you know, the profit, the total price of the share and all the total number of shares that you have out there versus like just the value of a company that you can get from like its profits that it's generating, right? And if there starts to be a big mismatch, you're like, well, Apple's still a profitable company, so like it's worth intrinsically, like just worth this much, you know. So when the share price drops a lot, you get the bargain hunters swoop in and say, well, like I'm happy to hold no matter what, you know. Or people say like, I believe in Zuckerberg, you know, even if he's gone on this metaverse tangent, I still believe in Zuckerberg. I still believe like Facebook is useful, right? There's still everybody over the age of 30 still has a Facebook account. And so like, I'm going to buy and I'm going to hold it, right? Because I believe. So it's only when you run out of believers that companies really struggle.
It continues to drop.
Yeah.
So have I got it right then, that it's dropping. Everyone's going panic. But then someone else eventually goes, I think that's low enough, I'm going to buy. And then enough people go and have that thought, I'm going to buy. And then it stops and it starts to return. Yeah.
So the classic example of it not stopping is Lehman Brothers, right? So like there's a 150-year-old investment bank. It took too much risk and it had mega losses and it didn't have enough capital to cover those losses. And so it literally went bankrupt, right? And when it goes bankrupt, there is nothing left for the shareholders. So the value of the shares went to zero. And that was the end of it. People lost everything. And all the Lehman Brothers employees were encouraged to put their pensions in Lehman Brothers shares. So they lost their job and the whole pension on the same day, right? And so that's where you do get nothing. And that's the risk you take. And that's why you should be rewarded by about 7% a year total return. So that's like the gains plus the dividends. That's why you should be rewarded every year for taking that risk that it does go to zero. And
you also should diversify, so not everything's with one company.
Exactly.
Okay, so that is my meathead question, because it's something I've always wondered. Is like I get why it goes up. More people buy. Price goes up. More people buy. if this is going up now, I'm not going to sell mine unless you give me a really good price. And then you give me a really good price, and then I sell. And then I've made $5. Great. Yep. And I do that. And that's kind of, I guess that's what day trading is it?
Yeah. And exactly. And that's why it's like a slippery slope to get into this stuff, because like I fundamentally don't believe in day trading. Like you will have 6 good months and then you'll get wiped out, or 6 good years and then you get wiped out, right? So, but you can go to things like Investopedia, which is the equivalent, the investment equivalent of Wikipedia. And you can just go down that rabbit hole, or you just Google like, how does the stock market actually work? And like you'll see like how it works. But the key point is like you don't need to know it. You know, like my mum and my grandmother, who is 103, like they're both invested in like globally diversified funds. They don't need to know how it works. They just need to know how to log in, how to set up a brokerage account, how to log in, how to place an order, how to transfer the money into that platform. That's it.
It's especially powerful when you see the slides that you have in your presentation and the slides that Andrew showed whenever I sat in his talk. Yeah, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. But if you just go there and there over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's always higher. Do you know? Again, unless...
And a lot higher, right?
Yeah, well worth the time. So getting caught and thinking about, like you see in my lift going up and down to my apartment, there is a single line of news. And often that news is this share price dropped, you know, and I'm like, huh. But if I had or has increased, if I was a day trader, you'd be like, all right, quickly get me on the app, let me buy.
You don't have time for that stuff, right?
Also, it's not like it's not. Yeah, I don't know how that would. I don't know why you would do that, but especially when you see. This is my point. Sorry, is when you see the visuals, you're like, oh, well, I can get a bunch more money just by doing it very simple, just like click it in, click, and then leave it alone, click and leave it.
Yeah, and if the share price goes down, you can be happy, right? Because then you can buy more shares that you're going to hold for the rest of your life, and you've got a discount on them. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I see the dip happening. Well, I know in the next 3 months I'm going to be buying more. So I'm going to be buying at that lower price, and it's going to bounce back up because there's millions of me's out there going, oh, great, it's going down, but it's going to go back up. Let me continue. And then as a joint unity, you kind of turn that curve, and you've got, your 3 months of a bonus price.
Yeah, and then you're doing well. So as long as you've got your cash buffer, so that if you like where this is risky or dangerous is that like if suddenly you need to buy a house, or suddenly you run out of money, or you lose your job and you just desperately need some cash, and you have to sell your stocks when they're down because you've lost your job during a recession, then that's really bad, right? Because you permanently made a loss, right? If the stock market just goes down, you don't do anything, you've temporarily made a loss on paper, and that loss will disappear as the stock market goes back up again.
Yeah.
So you do need those layers of resilience. You do need the cash buffer and the sinking funds for like the property deposit and some bonds, and you get dividends from stock as well. You know, like all those things will help so that you don't ever have to sell your stocks until you just sell a little bit each year in retirement, and then that's it. Right?
Okay, one more meathead question. What's the difference between a stock and a bond?
Great question. Okay, so a stock, you are a part owner of a company, right? And so if you buy one share in Apple, like you're entitled to go and vote in the annual general meeting and all this sort of stuff, and you are an owner, and that means that you share in the upside. But equally, if the company goes bankrupt, like you lose everything, right? A bondholder, you're actually lending money to the company or to the government, and they pay you interest to say thank you, and then they give you your money back, and you have a higher claim if they go bankrupt than the shareholders, right? So it should be less risky. Like if they, once they've sold the furniture and the Apple logo on top of the building and all that sort of stuff, then that goes to pay off the bondholders. And then if there was anything left beyond that, then the shareholders might get it, right? So bonds are less risky, but a bond is like the opposite of a mortgage, right? So with a mortgage, you borrow money from the bank, you pay interest to say thank you, and then you pay the money back eventually. With a bond, you effectively lend your money to the US government or to Apple, whoever. They pay you interest to say thank you, and then hopefully you get the money back. But the reason we have bonds, the only reason I think to hold bonds, is to like smooth the volatility, the ups and downs of the stock market, right? So the older you get, or the more scared of stocks you get, the more you can use some bonds to like dampen that volatility. You have a stock fund maybe it's 80% in stock in one stock fund, and then 20% in one bond fund, and that will just like smooth out the ups and downs, so it's less scary when there's a crash. 2020 stock market down 32%. 2008 stock market down 52% temporarily. These things are scary, right?
So we're getting some banging from next door, but we'll plow on. We're almost finished. Basketball next door. So basically what you're saying is stocks, you buy a share in the company. Bond is safer, less risky. So if you are a risk taker, buy a load of stocks. If you're risk averse, buy a bit more percentage of bonds of your overall pack.
Yeah, so like your overall portfolio, like when you're retired, you should be like 60% stocks, 40% bonds. I wouldn't go below that in terms of stocks, because you need stocks for the growth, and you need bonds for the downside protection to like smooth out the volatility. Or if you suddenly need to sell something to buy a house and stocks are down, you sell the bonds instead. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. All right, well, let's leave it at that for today. There's enough to digest in that for sure. When are you back in town?
I'm around different times, so like let's see.
So you can where can people reach out to you if they want to?
So I'm always around on deadsimplesaving.com, and that's my base. So you can I've got lots of free information on there. I've got like paid courses if you want to accelerate your progress. And that's where I'm at. Or you can follow me on Instagram, I guess, on Dead Simple Saving for like 5% more amusing on there. Yeah. And on LinkedIn and all those good places.
LinkedIn as well, Steve Cronin. So, and then something you said earlier on, Dead Simple Saving. Your Dead Simple Savings, is it Steve on Instagram? I'm going to confuse people.
Dead Simple Saving, yeah.
So if you want advice, contact Steve. I've done a load of sessions with him and still learning, so don't feel like you need to know it all straight away. Sometimes you're better off with a little bit of knowledge and just stay in your lane and just keep doing it and don't worry about the ups and downs.
The less you think about it, you just set it and forget it, you do so much better than anyone who's like trying to be clever about this stuff.
Amazing. Okay, cool. And next time you're back, we'll talk next about shorting the stock exchange and what happened in 2008 and all those fun stuff.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.